rolling, then we have to do that extra level of complication. But let's look at this here. First of all, I'm going to go ahead and adjust the anchor point on this ball so that it's at the bottom. That way when we squash and stretch, we'll be doing it to the bottom of the ball. This is pretty critical for making it look like it's hitting the ground. So for instance, when it makes contact right here, I think we might have an extra one.
I'll wait.
Yeah. There we go. Let's draw a floor. So I'm going to go ahead and make, we'll make a new solid. And just move this down. Right about there. Cool. Going back here. So here we want the ball to smush when we hit the ground, right? We got to go to scale, and because I moved the anchor point down here, now when I scale, I'm going to need to undo the chain. It's going to smush from the bottom. If the anchor point's in the wrong spot, if it's in the middle, then when you go to scale something like this, it'll be bringing it up off the ground, right? So this is ideal. Anchor point placement, this will come up for the rest of the semester, is critical, especially for things that sit on the ground. Anything that sits on the ground, whether it's like a 3D mesh or an object like this, you want its main anchor point to be the point at which it should sit on the floor. And so moving the anchor point down there, and let's squash this a little bit. So like from the homework, we're going to have like a point at which it's deformed here. So this is off. And for this one, we'll try and do it like symmetrically. So let's go ahead and say, I'm going to set a keyframe right before we bounce. So keyframe there for scale. Right where we hit, let's go ahead and say that this goes out to like 130. And then that means if it's 30, this is going to come down to 70. Right? So trying to like conserve volume in that way. We'll do that with this one. This will be more, remember the continuum from Monday where it was like cartoon and like real physics? Here we'll try and do like some volume conservation so that we'll squash and stretch equally in each direction. So we'll go from there to 100, 100. And let's just look at that in real time. So when we're doing this in animation, there's almost always some pre-squashing. Because when it's played back at speed, especially with the motion blur, it's pretty quick. So in real life, there would be no deforming of the ball until it makes contact with the ground, right? The ball doesn't know it's hitting the ground. But for this, in an effort to make it smoother and more interesting, there's a little bit, I have it 2 frames. So very, very slightly. In fact, we could even do less. But then let's make the tail of it a little bit longer. So maybe a few frames. And let's go ahead and these frames are totally linear right now, which is not going to be great. Even though it's really short, adding a little bit of ease to these is a good idea. So then you can ease in and ease out of the squashing. So subtle, especially with the motion blur on. Let's turn it off. See what a big difference the motion blur makes. In fact, let's just go ahead and, well, let's keep it in there. So we got this. I want to see all the keyframes that I have on this thing. Nathan, remember that shortcut? Nathan, that's that guy over there. He was right. You. U, right. So U gives me the Y position and the scale, and so I can see them together. And now that I've got a good squash, I can copy and paste that. So Control C, and remember, it squashed 2 frames before the impact. So I'll come over here, and I'm not going to put it, this is another reason to try and keep the squashes on, or the bounces on a specific frame. So this one kind of drifted a little bit. Let's move it over. I'm going to come to here and paste the squash there. Let's come back here. And to play it in the wrong spot. Yeah, so I moved this so it's on the line, back it up 2 frames, paste here. There we go. So now I'm going to put this in fit mode so that I can see what I'm doing. And same thing here. Again, holding down Shift so I can see both at the same time. Okay, good. That one's right on a frame. Back up 2 frames. Paste one more time. Cool. Let's see how that looks. Let's make our play area bigger. Brighton, what's the shortcut for expanding the play area? If I want to put the end of the play area over here? No. Close. I just used tilde. What does tilde do, Harold? Hold on. Now we're over to Harold. Harold, what does tilde do? Someone said it. What does tilde do? Full screen. Right. So what takes the end of the play area? End. End. Right? So B and end. Remember, there's a lot of shortcuts like this in After Effects where there's 2 keys that do like the beginning of the thing and the end of the thing, and they're next to each other on the keyboard. So B and N. N. There we go. Now. Cool. Let's turn on a low motion blur. See how the motion blur makes everything better? Keep that in mind as we go through the semester. There's really pretty much everything you make should have some motion blur on it. Without it, it just ends up looking too, computer-y. Even if we're trying not to make it look realistic. Awesome. So we've got this. Now, we probably don't want it to squash quite as much each time, right? And so this was in the homework too. We can bring these in. So if I just grab this one and this one, I should be able to, it's not giving me the box. I'll drag this one down. No, let's just do it by hand. Bring this one down a little bit. This one down a little bit. This one down some more. This one down some more. There we go. So we're squashing a little bit less each time. And maybe the squashing actually happens over less time. So let's make it a little bit more exaggerated on the first one. I'm going to move these over. And then on the last one, I'm going to move these in. Holding down Shift so I don't distort them. And even less here. So move this in. Grab this in. Cool. So let's work out a continuum here. We'll go in this direction. So over here, this is fairly physics-ish, right? It's not super cartoony, right? There's not a lot of super exaggeration here yet. And we're just doing one squash and return. So let's go ahead like so. Everybody understands the relationship between these two graphs here. Yeah? As far as like these things, the height of them lining up with the point at which everything impacts, right? And Eric, what was the key I showed you last time to retime animation? If you need to take a whole sequence and smush it down so it's shorter. Someone help him.
Use option. Like select.
Alt and then pull the whole thing through.
Yeah, Alt on PC, that'll be Option on Mac, okay? Alt is Option. So yeah, taking the whole thing and smushing it. But the thing you need to be aware of, because it's becoming important now, is that when you do that, sometimes things can end up not on a keyframe, not on a frame, right? Things can end up discombobulated. For instance, like this, I'm going to zoom in time. What key am I using to zoom in time, Akash?
What?
To zoom in and out in time?
The plus and minus.
Plus and minus, right? Without control, just plus and minus. And so if I take this stuff and there's the Alt, or even if I do it this way, I'm resizing it, but I'm so zoomed in, you can see the grid, right? And stuff is moving in between the grid. So if you do that, especially on a keyframe animation like this, afterwards I would take the time to make sure and nudge them so that they're mostly on actual frames, especially for the ball bounce, so that the actual ball bounce impacts happen on a specific frame. Cool. So we'll call this one real ball squash. Awesome. And I'll copy and paste this and position. Let's move this one over. We'll do a couple of these. And let's turn the first one off. And we'll call this one will get a little bit more exaggerated, so we'll call this one Little Tune Squash. There we go. And U, so we can see them all. U, there we go. So first thing is, let's go ahead and give ourselves, let's just work primarily with the scale. So the scale before, we just did the squash. Let's do some squash and rebound stretch. So it smushes and then it will the other direction and comes back, right? So in order to do that, we need to get the inversion thing happening here. So if we just look at the scale, let's go ahead and I'm going to move these in just a little bit. And now let's take another couple frames here, like this. The ball needs to go in the other direction scale-wise. And so there it is. The red line needs to go down. And the green line needs to go up. I'm having it go not quite as far as the original squash, right? And now that needs to get back to regular. So Control C, this one here. Let's move it over a few. Control V, there we go. And now B, N. Right, so we squash and then stretch back the other direction and then come back. Maybe this happens a little bit faster. So I'll take these frames and hold a shift, drag them over a little bit. So it's taking not quite as long. Move this one over a few. There we go. And let's make it one more super wobbly. This is more like, we'll call this one wobble squash. And one more time, the scale here on the Y going again this way, out, like that. Like that. And then again, Control C, Control V. And so now in between bounces, the whole time, it's kind of still wobbling from the original impact. Everybody with me there? And now that I've got this wobble pattern set up, I can go ahead and Control C. And again, I can paste this right before the next bounce, about 2 frames out. Control V. I can scale it. Let's move some of these down. Let's do that here. It's got a weird keyframe there. Let's just delete that. There we go. And grab. So this is one of those things where this wobbling probably wants to happen faster. So let's grab these. You know, I'm going to leave that one out of it because this is the impact point, but have the preceding wobbles go faster. So I'll grab these guys, right? So this is the first one after there. Slide it this way a little bit. Also, smush the timing a little bit. There we go. And pull some of these down. So these two, let's pull those down. And then here and here, bring these in. Just trying to make it less than before. And same thing here. And then our very last one, we kind of got mixed up with the keyframes, so we don't want it to be deforming the whole time. Let's watch that, and you'll see that the last bounce looks weird. Let's look at it. Way too long in here, that's deforming. Make sure it stays the same size for a little while. So essentially holding those keyframes in between there. We have our last one. Maybe there's another wobble after that. So just these guys. Control C, Control V. Again, making it smaller. So if we compare this one to this one, I don't think there's a way to change those colors. Yeah, it doesn't work. But we see the first one is just single squash per impact, and the next one we have squash, wobble, squash, wobble, squash, wobble with each one. Right? And if we look at them together at the same time, everybody following so far? Right? So we're moving towards super cartoony on that spectrum. Again, not saying one is better than the other. I'm just saying these are different like shades that you want to have in your toolbox, right? As far as like the amount of squashing and stretching here. Being able to have the actual regular, and then sort of the feedback wobble. Cool. Let's make one more. And let's move this one over. Again, I'm able to move these over because there's no keyframes on X, right? We've only been going up and down just on Y. Cool. So for the next bit, in order to make this work a little bit better, we're kind of up against it. If you saw in the last one, given how long the bounces take, there's really not. We're kind of filling up all the time there. There's not a whole lot of time to do much else in between each bounce, right? And so in order for this to look even more cartoony, the bounces itself need to be a little bit more cartoonish and different in that way. So we're going to need more time, essentially. We can come in here to, we'll call this tune. Let's give ourselves more time. What would be the best way to do that, Yura? Just make these bounces last longer.
I see. If we move those points farther from the
Nope, all I did was change the view. I didn't do anything yet. So what we were just talking about, if I want to take all these and I want to
wasn't it shift?
Alt, right? So if I take this and stretch it out a bit, even a little bit more. Actually, let's make sure we have all the keyframes when we do that. So I'm going to hit U and grab everything here and Alt stretch. Give myself almost another second and see how that goes. Cool. Let's turn this one off. Let's save before I lose this stuff. Let's turn this one off. There we go. Just focus on this one. And let's make the bounce themselves a little bit more cartoonish. So, okay, go back to the graph editor here. And under position, we want more of that like hanging in the air, where we bounce and Bugs Bunny jumps and he's like floating for a while, right, before he goes back down. And so we can do that grabbing these. This is why it's good to have a Bezier handle at the top of your your arc on this one. Y position. Let's bring all of these out. And bring that up. This out. This up. This up. A little bit more here. Like that. So making them even sharper, horseshoe U shapes. Like that. Make sure these are long. And here. And let's make it even longer now. So back here, grab all of them. Let's go on Alt again. There we go. Cool. Now, let's come back in here and really exaggerate what's happening with the squash. So here, the ball stretching down. So once it starts moving here, having the ball actually kind of, totally not like the real world, the ball will like reach for the ground, right? Like it's stretching out. And so we could do that with some position keyframes here. It needs to get back to usual there, but let's go ahead and with the scale and go down that way, up that way, and have it be just as it's starting. And let's move these two a little bit closer to the bounce impact. And then grab this one, get the handle so that we're staying in the original position a little bit longer. And let's hit N here. Right, so now we're reaching towards the ground, right? This sort of like pre-squash. In fact, let's get that even closer. So if this is the impact point, let's move this over a little bit, almost just one frame, and move this over and exaggerate it even more. So kind of up and further down. There we go. So let's say that this is 170. There we go. So really reaching towards the ground, right? We're totally out of like physics realm now, and we're just reaching down. And so here, now that we've got that sort of happening, this whole pre-stretch, we can do that before each main bounce. So I'll probably have to take out the last sort of wobble there, but then we can add this beforehand. So just these two keyframes, which are sort of the pre-stretch, Control C, Control V. Probably gonna need to move this back. And give it some more time to stretch. So each time it's like reaching towards the ground. Maybe a little bit less the second time. There we go. So a combination of it hanging in the air longer and reaching towards the ground. If we look at all of them together, let's go ahead and do this. Right, as far as like on the continuum there, you see how we're going from something that's more realistic over to something that's starting to look, more and more cartoony. So, and what do we do? This one, just squashing. This one, squashing and stretching 3 times. Wobble, 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 right? This one, longer time, so more hang time, and pre-squash, where we stretch before the actual event. That's more kind of squash and stretch, and then kind of anticipation, right? That's one of our, like I said, there's a lot of overlap between these things. So we're talking a little bit here. The anticipation was just in the position, right? So these, it's not like each one of these equates to one of the transform properties in Cinema 4D, right? Like this one is for position, this one is for rotation. It's the concept that you could apply to any of the transform properties, or probably all of them, right? And so we're doing a little bit of anticipation with that pre-squash. And then over here, you can see, yeah, he's doing it right here. Anticipation with the launching of that thing. And yeah, before we get to the last one, let's also do super fun thing. So the motion blur looks better, right? And we decided that we always want motion blur. But there's a stylistic choice to be made here. And this isn't really a continuum. It's kind of an either or. So like with 3D animation, yeah, the motion blur is kind of, it's what happens with the camera. How many of you guys have taken digital photography already? Right. So what is it in this camera that determines the amount of motion blur you have? Generally, what parameter of the camera? Shutter speed. Exactly. Right. The longer you have the film or sensor exposed to light, the more blurry moving things will appear. Right. We'll get into virtual camera stuff in a while. But so yeah, motion blur, which is kind of, it's exactly like real world cameras, right? Or, so this is a stylistic choice, right? Things can sort of have this when they move, or smear. So smearing is analogous to this, but kind of without the blurry part, right? So this is coming from the world of cameras. This is coming from the world of, hand-drawn stuff. In early hand-drawn animation, you couldn't really blur stuff, like you're stretching things. They're actually gotten longer, right? So this smearing, in your projects, you'll sort of make a stylistic decision. Either things are going to have this kind of look when they move quickly, or things are going to have this kind of look when they move quickly. We'll look at the difference here. So let's do smearing. How do we do smearing? Let's turn off the motion blur. And one of the ways here, let's do it with this one first. The way you do it most often is kind of hackish, but it works. But you need to be careful. You can slow things down a lot here. I'm going to smear this ball over here. The effect that sort of gives us is echo. Echo does exactly what you think it does. It just delays the thing in time. Okay. So for instance, if I put the echo on this, right? So what are effects we've used? We've used, what's that? Posterizing, right? Yeah, posterize time. Okay, so make sure it's selected, and then double click. We get echo on here, and so let me echo time -0.3. Let's say -0.5, so that you can tell. And turn off the other ones so we can see what's happening here. Cool. So it makes a copy of it that's delayed in time, right? Is there anyone taking electronic music yet? It's in the program. Everybody will take it eventually. But this is a music thing all the time, right? You play a note, the computer remembers it and it plays it back, right? Delay. Called delay, but it's an echo effect. So the thing is, if we stack enough of these up, we can create kind of like this The number I usually use is -0.001. And then if I make like 10. Let's make a little bit more. So by stacking them up close enough, we get the thing to sort of like actually stretch as it goes down and comes back up. So I'm now 40 echoes at -0.001. Let's go back to 20. Let's say it's -0.01. Yeah, so they're too far apart. The idea is that in order for it to look like it's actually smearing, you don't want to be able to see the individual echoes, right? You kind of want it to look like one mass that's deforming, right? So let's go with -0.005. There we go. And maybe like 10. And once you've got the settings that are working for you, so I'm at -0.002 for time, and then number of echoes is 10. I'm going to go ahead and Control-C. And if you select another layer, you can just paste the effect on there. So then it goes onto this layer. And over here too. Control-V. And if we, can we adjust them all at the same time? I think you can do that. Let me give this like 15. Right, and it really exaggerates over here. Now we get like this non-uniform deformation of what's going on with the super toony one, where it's like, it's kind of almost dripping towards the floor. And you see how this works better on the more toonish that things are, right? So for instance, this one here versus the other two. So, but beware the numbers here, right? So I've got -0.002, that's probably a good number to start with all the time, and then 15. If you dial this up too high, then things will just slow down past where it gets usable. Another thing for speeding things up while you're working, some of you have been doing this, so this down here, full. This means that I'm looking at all the pixels in my comp, all 1920 by 1080 of them. If I need to speed up the view, my computer's running slow at home, I can cut it down to half, and the computer will only draw half as many pixels for the preview. You'll still make it look good when you finish the thing, but for when you're working, half, third, and if you're really hurting, quarter. You know, it starts to look pretty chunky at that point. But again, this won't affect the final output, just the preview so you can work faster. Everybody with me? So the confusing part here is that when you implement these things, they're kind of different. Is that the motion blur on layers is, you know, like a layer setting. So it's the motion blur checkbox. Over here, when you're smearing, you're usually using the echo effect. -0.002, 15 copies. For echoes. And And let's do one more. So we got tune bounce 1. I'm going to save. Tune bounce 2. I'm going to turn the effect off for a second so we can see what we're doing. And to get it even more squashier, stretchier, let's go Y position. There we go. So the effect, we can turn the effect off temporarily just by pressing this FX up here. So that is up here. And you can also see the effect down here in the layer menu. If you unfold effects, echo, you can also enable or disable the effects there, either way. So now, come back to position. To make it look even toonier, one of the counterintuitive things here is really like splatting all over the ground, right? So we can take the Y coordinate here, Control C, and let's make it a couple frames here, Control V, and not make it a bounce at all. So making sure that this is straight. And let's make this longer. So I'll move these over. There we go. Now, especially without changing the squash and stretch stuff, now it's really like sitting there and then sort of propelling itself back up. So I guess when you think of this continuum, like as we move over, it's becoming more and more of a character over on this side, right? Where it's actually totally disobeying what's going on with physics. So it's sitting there and then coming back up. And so in this case, when it hits right here, let's turn this off. Let's also make this really go to town. So on this side, I'll grab this. Let's say it goes to 180, like 20. All right, so now it really splats onto the ground and then pulls itself back up. And we're still leaving that reverse wobble in there. And then the stretch towards the next. But let's make this even more pronounced. So come back in here, and I'm going to take all of these and move them over. So we almost get like a, slowing down of time as we're splatting against the floor there. When it gets so fat, maybe it doesn't, or when it gets here, we've totally lost like the volume conservation thing. And so even though it's spilling out, the Y here, maybe not quite so much so that it's a little bit bigger. And then maybe even more on the X. So we're really splatted out there. And so, the thing that isn't obvious at first is this, right? The fact that in order to get this real cartoony bouncing, you're actually kind of like splatting onto the floor for a while, and you gotta stay there. as it distorts against the floor. And then we can do the same thing on the next one. So for instance, if we take this and just kind of follow the same formula, so copy and paste just this keyframe, Control C, Control V. Make sure this is flat. There we go. And this is the impact point. So if I grab the rest of them and just sort of move everything else back, let's give ourselves some more time. There you go. And so here, you can see with the second one, the timing's okay, but the amount of splat, not so great. So again, turning that up. There. Maybe not quite as high as the first one. Cool. Let's move this one over. Look at them together. And let's turn on the smears. So this on, that's on, that's on. On. So the smear really, I think is like finishing touch on this as far as it like looking super cartoony. I mean, sort of, you guys are getting how to, manipulate shapes and everything, but it gives it that that effect where it's really distorting with everything. So all